Hi, it's Justin from CanadaWhips.com. Today we're going to be covering the Queensland Crossover. It looks like this. The Queensland Crossover is one of the most fundamental two-handed whip cracking routines. It's a good base for a number of different tricks, and just learning to do it with one hand on the bottom versus the other hand on the bottom makes you able to do a whole bunch of different tricks. However, the Queensland Crossover is also a very difficult routine, so don't be upset if you don't learn it right away. The main premise of the routine is doing an overhead crack and a reverse overhead crack, one after the other. Some people will call this crack a flick because if you were to tilt the plane of this trick kind of sideways, you would end up doing a flick on the ground rather than a reverse cattleman's crack. However, I like to think of that crack as the reverse overhead crack, and so that's what I'm going to be saying for the duration of this video. To start, you're going to want to learn to do this: overhead, reverse overhead. Make sure that you learn to do it in both hands. You're also going to want to make sure that your planes are really clean. You want the whip to be moving more or less horizontally. And you also want to keep your hand lower than your head. A common problem when learning this routine is that people will have learned the overhead crack is like this. Their hand will be over their head, hence overhead crack. But in actuality, it's just the whip that needs to be over your head. And you can look, when I'm doing it, my hand is actually a fair bit lower than the top of my head. I can even get it all the way down here, at shoulder height. Make sure you're able to get your overhead crack fairly low in both hands. Once you're able to do that comfortably, you're going to want to learn that pattern in both hands at the same time. When you're doing this crossing pattern, make a conscious effort to keep one arm just a little bit lower than the other one. If your arms are operating at the same height, it's likely that the whips are going to tangle. If your arms are one higher and one lower, the whips have more space and therefore are less likely to tangle. Once you can do the same time Queensland Crossover, try to stagger the cracks a little. And once you're confident with that, go into a full balance time Queensland Crossover. In the Queensland Crossover, your bottom arm always leads. The bottom arm will go up first and it'll crack first. Make sure when you're doing the Queensland Crossover, you make an effort to keep one hand always on the bottom. This is going to remove a lot of problems involving timing and having the whips tangling. If this way of learning is difficult for you, here's another way to try. Start with both your arms uncrossed like this. Bring your dominant hand forward so that it's pointing forward. Bring your non-dominant hand over that arm. So that looks like this. Once you're confident with that motion, try to go up for 2 overhead cracks. Again, note how low my hand is in relation to my head. If my hands are way up here, it becomes a lot more difficult to get the cracks. Once you can do this, take your bottom arm and do 1 reverse overhead crack. After that, do the same thing in your top arm. And then add in the next overhead crack. And so on. Eventually, you'll be doing the Queensland Crossover. Once you've learned the Queensland Crossover, try changing lead hands. Start with your other arm on the bottom. Once you've mastered both right hand and left hand on the bottom, you can start learning other Queensland Crossover fundamentals, which I'll cover in later videos. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.